Tanya. I'm sending my interview in English language as you requested. So you're welcome to use it in any format you wish. You can video interview this, or you can type it and have it published in a print in the magazine. So we'll start. I'll start answering some of the questions you sent me. The first question, I'll start with the question, what does Eurasia mean for me? Well, the first thing which jumps to mind is coming together of different cultures. And for me personally, it has a very deep meaning because, and I didn't introduce myself, of course, I'm Natella Lalabekyan. I live in Los Angeles. I'm a writer who is a member of Writers Union of Moscow and is also a member of Writers Union of Armenia. And the question of what does Eurasia mean to me is coming together of different cultures. Because since my early childhood, I was exposed to many cultures. I can jokingly say that I'm a professional immigrant because I was born in Armenia, and when I was 4 years old, my family moved to Moscow, and this was back in U.S.A. And when I was 18, from Moscow, my family immigrated to the United States, to Los Angeles. So you can say I was exposed to many cultures from early on. Of course, it's a challenge, but it's also a gift because to be able to enrich yourselves from bits and pieces of different culture in a meaningful way, and that's the important part, to do it in a meaningful way, especially for a writer, I think is of great benefit. So to tell you a little bit more about me is I have 2 degrees from United States. I have a bachelor's degree in Slavic Languages and Literature, minoring in art history, and I have a master's degree, M.B.A, or Masters in Business Administration from U.S.A. So I didn't really plan to become a writer, and it's not and speaking of writer, later on I started writing, of course, small prose. But I started as a poet. I started writing back in Moscow when I was 16. And I was planning to become an art historian. So when we came to United States, I decided to get, for some reason, bachelors in Slavic Languages and Literature and minoring in art history. But I got married early and I had a child, so the financial challenges of an immigrant life made me think twice before picking writing as a professional career or even art history. So what I did is I ended up working with my husband. We had a medical laboratory which we established in '94. Which we successfully sold in 2006. But the important part, as I mentioned, is to harmoniously to be able to put together all the little pieces of yourself, to piece together in a meaningful way, meaning never give up on your dreams. Do the best you can. And as I used to say, that life is giving us certain cards, and we make and play the best game we can out of the cards which been given to us. And in 1997, I published my first book, poetry book, and in 2002 I published my second poetry book in Los Angeles. At that point, I got introduced to an amazing person to a famous composer, Konstantin Orbelyan. And Konstantin Orbelyan, when I say the name, I mean the elder composer who was an amazing friend to me. And we wrote 3 songs. At that point, he introduced me to his friend, a poetess, Dima Feodorovna Kazakova, in Moscow. And it was her suggestion that I should get involved more professionally with literature. She loved my writing, and she suggested that I should stay in touch with the literary circles back in Moscow. So she suggested for me to enter one more time the university, the Literature Institute, Gorky Institute, which I have at loss to finding the right word, заочное отделение, which kind of is, it's like a correspondence course, but not quite, if you know what I mean. So I did end up going back to Moscow to a literature institute, and which I graduated from in 2008. In 2007, I published another book in Moscow, and then subsequently 3 more books. Eventually, I ended up writing prose, of course. All this sounds just biographical. I assume you want to hear something more interesting, more of my, I guess, share my wisdom. You asked me to give some suggestions. One of the questions was, what can I suggest, what helpful advice can I give to young writers, for example? For me, a very important, helpful event, of course, as I mentioned, was meeting of Konstantin Orbelyan and Rima Feodorovna Kazakova. So I would suggest, if you can find, for a young creative person, if you can find an older and wise mentor, it would be very helpful. It's very hard to navigate through creative water, especially when you're young, and it's very helpful to have somebody older and wiser. Another suggestion, another advice I would say, especially now, because I know that a lot of younger writers, they don't live anymore in their motherlands, fatherlands, whatever you call it, live in different countries, is not to lose those important parts and pieces of yourself, because this is who you are, this is what you are. All those pieces are the integral part of yourself. So when you write about something which is close to your heart, write about something you know, write about something you really felt. For example, when I started writing prose, my prose is short stories, and they are autobiographically inspired. For me, the great inspiration in my life, it was speaking about literally allusions, influences. I would say the writings of Marcel Proust made a huge difference in my life, because when I started writing in this genre, I was a little bit at loss, thinking, what I write, obviously, it's not memoirs, it's not about myself, it's about bigger than myself, and but I'm still part of my writing. So where does it put me? What genre do I belong to? Does this even make sense, what I do? And then I got introduced to the writings of Marcel Proust, and I realized that how great can this be? Because what he was able to do, and I hopefully I can in a small part do similar thing, he spoke about the bigger life, the bigger world, the bigger culture, and yet being very personal, and yet being part of the bigger culture. He was there, so was the world. One of the best, my favorite writers of all time. Also experiment with genres. Do not be afraid to go outside of the limits of one genre. For example, a great influence also and a liberation for me was to be introduced to Baudelaire's poem en prose. For me, the traditional limits of classical poetry, I started feeling the traditional limitations of classical poetry because I had too many thoughts to express. I had too much to say. And the limitations of classical rhyming poetry, of course, which imposes on you very strict rules, limits you, but yet what I had to say was poetic. Free verse. Of course, America, with its tradition based in Walt Whitman, has a great tradition of free verse. Yet the Russian poetry is not as rich in it's naturally the language itself dictates a more classic rhyming poetry style. Yet I was able to go from classic rhyming poetry to free verse to poem en prose and to eventually to short stories. So experiment. Do not be afraid to experiment. Be true to yourself. Find a harmonious way to connect all the cultures, all the bits and pieces of yourself in a way to be true to yourself. That's the most important thing, advice I can give to young writers. I guess, there was one good question I liked is, okay, I guess, who is one of my, the creative people who inspire me, whom I truly admire. And the first and the most close to my heart name, which comes to my mind, of course, is Charles Aznavour, who recently passed away. Is a brilliant case of how a child immigrant can put together all cultures in the most successful ways. He was exposed, his parents come from partially Armenians from Georgia, French culture, all those cultures together, and be a prominent figure in his new country, to be the face of French culture, at the same time to be so Armenian and to be so useful and helpful to both countries and to be admired by all countries. Pretty much, I don't think there is a place on this planet who doesn't know that name. So this is one of those cases where I find very inspirational and meaningful. Any place we go, we should make a difference. We should try to make this world a little bit better place. So I think I have one more question. If I'd like to talk about one of my projects, actually I do have an interesting project. I mentioned Rima Fedorovna Kazakova, my mentor. So then she passed away. I proposed at the Guild, Guild of Moscow, Writers Union of Moscow, to find a prize, and we have a prize which we give for 11 years now to young writers, which is called The Beginnings, Natella. It's a poetry prize, and we've been doing this. I'm the chairman of the prize committee, and we've been doing it for 11 years. We had several wonderful young poets who received the prize. And I have a similar endeavor in Armenia, another prize in the name of Yerevan, the former chairman of Armenian Writers Guild, who also influenced greatly my involvement with Armenian Writers Union. Was a very important figure in my life. So in his honor, we also have two prizes, both for young writers in prose and poetry. Was very dear to my heart projects that I've been involved with. I think I also believe I have a question about my involvement with Eurasian Creative Guild. Of course, I welcomed the idea wholeheartedly because I realize how important it is to the writers, the ones who are back in their countries, to be in touch with the outside world, and the ones who left their countries are on the outside to keep and be in touch with their home countries. It's a great idea. Is a great medium. Is a great guild that I'm very happy to be part of course. And I did participate in a competition in a form of small prose. I had a story sent, I think, which I became a finalist of Boy and a Star. And this year I'm also participating in the competition. Let's see if I have any more questions or interesting stories to tell. I think I pretty much answered all the questions on my list. I wish everybody good luck, stay happy, stay healthy, stay away from the virus, stay in touch with your creative friends. Love and prosperity. Goodbye.